Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I've been told to tell you all to turn your cell phones off, so you should probably turn your cell phones off, but it's okay if you don't want to as well. My name is Graham Parks. I'm the main writer and one of 3 creative directors behind this indie game, Before Your Eyes. It came out 2 years ago on Mac and PC, released on mobile via Netflix last year, and just about a week ago launched on PlayStation VR 2. But if you're not familiar with the game, you definitely will be by the end of this, so don't worry. Yeah, in 2014 was my last year of college, and one of my oldest friends from high school, Will Hellworth, who you see right there, called me up and pitched me this crazy idea for a video game he wanted to make for his college thesis project. And basically what he had discovered is that with this readily available plugin, even the most basic computer webcam could do eye tracking. And he wanted to design a game around that, specifically around the process of blinking. He was intrigued by the physical inevitability of that process, that no matter how hard you try to keep your eyes open, you'll ultimately fail. And he saw this as a metaphor for death, which is something that he'd been wrestling with in his personal life for a variety of reasons. But he also saw it as kind of like a subversive punk rock statement on what video games can be, because I think we're so used to video games being about winning and triumphing over adversity and, you know, powering up and leveling up and defeating the final boss. And yeah, I think his question was, what if we make a game about losing, where you lose it, you know, no matter how hard you try, you can't win a staring contest with a web camera. You're going to have to blink. And so what if we made a game where you lose over and over and over again, and then you die, and that's the end of the game. And the game will take place on a character's deathbed, and life is going to flash before your eyes. And every time you blink, you'll jump forward in time to a different memory of your life. And Will knew I was a writer. We grew up, but we went to the same high school. We took the bus together and spent, you know, all our time talking about video games, basically, and he knew I wanted to write games, and so he wanted me to come on and write this game for him. And I can tell you right now, it was the single greatest call I'd ever received in my life, because this game, this pitch, felt like the culmination of everything I wanted to be a part of creatively. While Will was at USC studying games, I was at NYU studying playwriting, but really spending most of my time watching old movies at the Film Forum, this repertory movie theater where I used to work, smoking a lot of weed, playing a lot of video games. And in my very pretentious NYU film kid way, I'd become obsessed with this idea that these filmmakers that I was learning about from the silent era or Alfred Hitchcock or the French New Wave, that if they were alive today, they'd probably be making video games and not films, because, you know, you watch all these groundbreaking old films that were sort of playing with the form, and I wasn't seeing that kind of formal innovation in the current cinema. But where I did find it was in games, and I don't think it's really discussed enough, but those were some really incredible years for narrative indie games, I think. It felt like every few months something that was coming out that was totally left field and groundbreaking, and, you know, being the perfect age, you know, in college, it just felt like my mind was constantly being blown. Here's, you know, some few of the classics that left a big mark on me. Yeah, and it felt to me like playing these games must have been what, like, seeing Breathless or watching Psycho or something must have felt like in the 60s, this sort of feeling of, I didn't know this medium could do this. And that was so core to what, you know, this concept that Will had pitched me. I had started signing up for classes at the NYU Game Center, which was sort of a new thing at the time. Had a great time in all the theory classes and all that, but as soon as I signed up for a Intro to Unity course, I had to drop out because 3 weeks in, I was just too dumb to follow along. So this is a GDC talk from somebody who couldn't make it through an Intro to Unity course. Yeah, I hope it gives some hope to people who maybe are as dumb as I am. And, you know, because of that, I kind of felt like, well, I'll probably never get to work in games. It was this, you know, medium I was obsessed with, but it just felt like there wouldn't be a place for me. So then when I get this call from Will, I just, you know, decided I was going to grab onto this thing and never let go. And at first, it went really well. Will brought in more of our old high school crew, like some of all our sort of best friends from high school. Ollie Lewin, who was the composer and became a co-director. Griffin Libby-Blesser, who was our art director. These were like people that I'd known since I was like 3 and 6 and 12. And he brought us all on to kind of bolster out his USC team that were building the actual game. And together we created this 15-minute version that we submitted to Indiecade in 2014, and it got in. And it barely worked. I mean, the Blink tech really was rough at that time. But when it did work, we were kind of shocked by people's reactions. And I'll be honest, the game really wasn't good enough to elicit the reactions it was getting. I mean, people were leaving the booth crying, and speaking just for myself, the writing certainly wasn't. There's a comment that we received on the YouTube upload of it that stays in my memory. And I kind of agreed with him. Not that I'd necessarily know, but there was. But he hadn't played it, and I think that, it was bad when you watched it as a YouTube video, but there was clearly something in the concept that was just sort of inherently emotional. By creating this physical connection between you and the game and forcing you to lose this staring contest again and again and again, the game sort of breaks down your defenses. And you have no choice to get kind of invested. So in 2014, it won the Developer's Choice at Indiecade, which we were shocked. And we decided we'd put more work into it. I wrote a totally new script. We basically rebuilt it from the ground up into something much better and more polished. It still was very rough by where it ultimately landed, but something that was better. And then in 2015, it won the Student Award here at GDC, at the IGF. Off of that, we started getting kind of cocky. We really thought, oh, maybe we really have the magic fairy dust here. So we decided we're going to make a full version of the game, a 2-hour movie-length experience that could fully explore this concept and really break us as this studio to be reckoned with. And what did that lead to was 5 years of constant failure. So that's what this talk is going to be about. It's going to be about the failure, this sort of cyclone of failure we found ourselves in, why it happened, how we eventually pulled ourselves out. And so it might seem a little grim at points, but I do promise a happy ending. Structure of the talk is going to be quickly take you through why I think we were failing so hard at these 3 key areas, and then just doubling back and explaining how I think I pulled us out of that rut. Not how I pulled us out, but how we pulled ourselves out. So we'll start with the first, which is the one I'm most responsible for, which was the story. Back in college, I actually had the pleasure of working as a part-time assistant for this amazing screenwriter, Michael Arndt, who has this great talk on the writing beginnings for Pixar that you can find on YouTube. But in it, he says this, that writing a script is like climbing a mountain with a blindfold. What seems like the hard part is climbing the mountain, and it certainly is. But the really hard part, and the part that can really take years, is even finding the mountain at all. And that really resonates with me for this game because it took me 5 years to even find the mountain of this story. And so to prepare for this speech, I went back through all these different versions, and it really was shocking to see how many versions there were of this game. The first one was, a shameless Death of the Salesman ripoff, which at 22 years old, I was audacious enough to literally steal dialogue from verbatim. I actually found the quote that I stole from. I guess that's homage, not plagiarism. I'm not sure. Then there was this one, which was kind of had this extending framing device. I think this was the GDC. I literally don't remember which story went with which build at this point. But this, your estranged father is reminiscing with you, and the twist, it takes you out on this fishing trip, and the twist is that you've both been dead the whole time, which I most certainly stole from some Twilight Zone episode. Love that show, but that is basically always the twist, that they've been dead the whole time. And then we, started experimenting with Twine for a while. So there was another version where, we had all these different endings where you could end like as a rich CEO, or you could die as an alcoholic on the street. And Twine is an incredible tool. But as I said, I'm very dumb, so it made me very confused very fast. And all these versions, I think, were clever enough. If there's one thing I've always been okay at, it's consuming and internalizing other media, and I had no shortage of amazing work to pull from, which dealt with the themes that I felt this game needed to deal with death and regret and the passage of time. But the stories always just felt like excuses for a tech demo, really, and then they showed the potential of the concept, but taken on their own, they were inauthentic. But there was another big issue, which was how the fuck are you supposed to tell a story when the player might blink out of any scene at any moment? And that leads us into how we were failing at design. So for those short early versions of the game, literally every single time you blinked, you would jump forward. So if the player is good at staring contests, they might see the whole story, but if, say, they had allergies or hay fever that day, they'd just rapidly blink through all the most important scenes. And it was sort of interesting in a punk way, but yeah, it was, as you can see here, it was not the most comfortable experience for our players. And it kind of left me screwed over as a writer because, as we know, good writing is often built on structure and callbacks, and how are you supposed to call back to something if I don't even know if the player has seen it or not? But it also felt like it was impossible to abandon this design principle because it was sort of core to the pitch of the game, which was every time you blink, you jump forward in time. We found a couple short-term solutions. We took out 3D movement. We switched from text to VO, which was something I had always wanted to do anyway, and those just allowed you to focus more on the staring contest and not worry about other elements of the game. And we introduced that narrative framing device, the dad on the boat, and that allowed us to at least have these little siloed sections where you would blink a bunch, and then you would go back to the framing device, and you could kind of rest your eyes. But no matter what we did, the player feedback was the same, that the game was fascinating and interesting, and the concept was great, but it was really annoying to play. And it worked in a 15-minute festival setting, but it certainly wasn't going to work for 2 hours, and it certainly wasn't something we could charge for unless we wanted to only have a bunch of refunds. And this led to big arguments about how the blink should work, and should we abandon the blink or find some new use for it? And that became this kind of philosophical argument about what the game is supposed to stand for. And as this team full of old best friends, that was happening a lot. A conversation about some section of the game would spiral out into these giant arguments about who we are as people, and so that kind of leads into how we were failing so badly at our process. After the big win at IndieCade and IGF, we got cocky, and we did what all indie teams do when they get cocky. We made a Kickstarter. And it funded. We raised $35,000, and I still laugh when I look at that number, considering the scope of what we were trying to do. We were all cheersing each other after that. But we were young and basically consisted of 5 high school friends, none of whom had ever shipped a game before. We were heading into our actual 20s. College was behind us, and our side gigs were turning into real jobs, and time was getting tighter and tighter, which was stressful enough on its own. But then, we had these Kickstarter backers, and they were getting angry, which was totally fair, because we had overpromised and underdelivered, as a lot of Kickstarters do, and our comment section quickly devolved from these words of encouragement to tirades against us. Here's a favorite. I just like when he says, I like when he says, blowing smoke up my ass while you spend backer money on whatever yuppity fuck sushi lunch or new age toys you choose. I just think, we weren't doing that, but I just think it's kind of good dialogue, It kind of feels like David Mamet or something. But this guy's good. This guy's got a future. So we began to feel that there was this angry public outside with pitchforks, which only compounded our stress. So we did what any team of immature man-children would do in that situation. We turned on each other. And we started pointing fingers, and we started blaming. And of all our failures as a team, and this is a talk about failures, this is really the only one that I'm actually ashamed of, because you really can't create anything without an emotionally safe environment. And you can't call yourself a team unless you trust each other. And a couple years into our failed Kickstarter, we found we had neither of those things. And that was really hard for us to admit to ourselves because we were all such old friends and we loved each other so much. But maybe that was sort of part of the problem, that we loved each other too much, kind of like family, and there wasn't, the kind of clear boundaries that you maybe want in a work situation. And the months passed into years. The game became a kind of real source of stress for me, and I think for the whole team. I mean, I'll only speak for myself. I'd be out at dinner, and a family member or friend would, hey, what happened to that game I gave $40 to, 2 years ago? And I'd have to try to explain it away. And it felt like a really impossible situation because on one hand, we all knew what we were doing wasn't working, and our lives and mental health would definitely be better if we just abandoned it. But we also had too much pride, and I think, we still somewhere really did believe in this game. We just had no idea how to make it. I'd like to say, now we're going to get to the solving problems part of the talk, I'd like to say that, just hard work or ingenuity pulled us out of that, but I really do think it was a lot of luck. I happen to, I'm also a filmmaker, and I happen to take a meeting at this company called Riot, R-Y-O-T, not R-I-O-T. We always have to make that clear. But they were a company that was recently bought by Verizon. They were looking to fund sort of experimental VR and AR. We were their first, game. We kind of got in under the wire, because we were going to do a VR slice of the game. But we ended up meeting this producer, Jake Sally, there, who'd been aware of our game from back in the day, and he felt like it was a great fit, and he convinced us to come in and pitch it to his bosses. And I said this to Jake recently on text, but there's really no way that I'd be here or anything would have happened if it weren't for meeting him at that point, because for some reason he chose to believe in the game and the team at a point when truly no one on the team believed in it. Later, we also signed to Skybound Games, and they were equally, probably more important for the game's success. But I focus on Jake for this talk because he's really the guy that kind of was the light in the darkness. And you'll find those people throughout the life of making games. But so to our surprise, Riot decided they wanted to fund us, and it wasn't a ton of money, but it was enough that some of us could go full-time for a little bit. And more important than that, we could bring on new team members. And the team really started to grow, and it grew outside of just a bunch of childhood friends. And this is, how you fix a process, because first of all, you just sort of have to button up when you actually enter a real professional situation. You get other voices, other perspectives, and you also get, when you're this long into working on something, you've completely forgotten what makes it cool or what makes it exciting. I think that, we were all at the point where talking about this blinking game was like, it was like nails on a chalkboard. But then to, bring these new people in who are really excited by the concept and seeing it through their eyes, it's really an amazing way to rejuvenate a process. And the other thing we started to do is we had the infrastructure to play test. And so Jake would help us organize play tests with the Riot employees. And obviously play testing is helpful, but I found one of the things that, consistent play testing, and obviously this is anyone in games, this should be obvious, but as I said, we were dumb, so it took us a while to learn this, but it helps you table arguments. You can just sort of, if you're disagreeing, you can just say, well, we'll find out at the play test. And it just makes everything feel a little less personal. And that kind of led us into how we solved the design of the game. We had hired a new designer, Bella Messick, who had just launched his own game, Little Bug, which is very cool. You guys can check it out. He was a solo dev, and we brought him on. And he was one of the people that really helped us start looking at the concept with fresh eyes. And he was like, why are you guys not just using Blink? Why are you just using Blink for this one thing? Can't Blink be used for other things that can be more fun and joyous? And he just kicked off a conversation that became months long with tons of iterations. But we kind of landed on embracing that idea, that we could use Blinks for other things than just passing time forward. So we started using Blinks to do things like you blink and you reveal the environment around you, or what just happened there? And you take photos or play music or paint, but because we still needed to retain that essential idea from the game, that genius idea of Will's, at a certain point in the scene, you're going to see this little metronome come up. Well, not yet here, but about midway through the scene, you're going to see this little metronome show up. And now the game is going to play like the game always played before. And so this is telling you that the next time you blink, it's going to be your last. And what's really cool about that is, like, we were able to, put the scenes into these two halves, so you didn't have to be constantly frustrating and freaking the player out. You could let them have fun, let them actually in and enjoy the moment of the scene, and then introduce that tension of, okay, you're about to leave. And we could also kind of mix those two designs, because we could introduce, like you see here, interactables, blinks after the metronome, and those were like these little islands. So it's like if you blinked before you got to that, then you would jump forward, but you can kind of jump over to that and blink, and that can help you to stay in the scene. So we actually found by sort of being a little more flexible with our concept, we were really able to actually bring out what was great about that initial concept, and we didn't have to lose it. And it allowed me to retain that sense of frustration of, shit, I missed it, I keep missing out on things, but also not letting that frustration totally dominate the experience. And you can see here, like, this is a little scene from the final script. And every scene I was able to kind of write at the bottom. At that time, we called it the blink counter. I don't know why, so I could kind of know, okay, I'm going to put the necessary stuff, the stuff that you need to know that I might call back to before that. But then once that comes up, I'm still going to leave. We had an amazing voice cast. I'm still going to leave all this really, charming dialogue and funny stuff and interesting moments that fill out the experience that you can still miss and still get that feeling of, oh God, I missed out. But you're not going to just like jump through stuff that you need to even understand the story at all. So we kind of were able to have our cake and eat it too, which leads to how I ultimately solved the writing part of the game. I think the real key to it was that I had time. As I said before, most of the other team were taking other jobs, and when we started with Riot, I was able to have about 4 months where I was the sole person working on the game full-time. And I recognize this is a really rare opportunity for game writers. We're often asked to fit our work around crazy production schedules, but I think as writers we sometimes have to advocate for that importance of that time and just uninterrupted time, because I really do believe the most important work happens in your subconscious. And if you don't have that time to think and to gestate and you're always on that next deadline, you're not going to access the deep work. And that's what those 4 months gave me. And so I'd have these long meetings with Will and sometimes our art director Griffin and Ollie, who would become a co-director on the game. And we'd all just sit around and pitch ideas, and then I'd get to go off and write. And at the end of the week, I'd send them stuff, and they'd send me reactions. And it was sort of a dream for a writer. I realized that what was holding me back for so long was this imposter syndrome, because, all those years ago, Will had brought me this incredible idea, maybe my favorite idea of all time, and I felt like it could be the most meaningful and heartbreaking work ever. I think there was just something about blinking, you're going to literally blink through someone's life. And it kind of felt like, why isn't, Terrence Malick doing this? Why am I doing this? And to kind of give up on that feeling of we're going to do the best version, and try to figure out what's the version that I know how to do, and what's the version that this team knows how to do. Because that was something we had that other teams didn't. We were all childhood friends. We grew up within biking distance of each other, and we were all intimately aware of each other's upbringings and life story. That's me and Will at prom. That's Ollie and I when we were literally 4 years old. There's Griffin and Ollie. I don't know what they're doing there with their boxers, but so we started kind of taking a walk down memory lane, and we digitized old home movies of our real childhood memories, and we're sharing things with each other. And a lot of the props and environments you'll see in the final game are taken directly from those home movies. Like the house in the game is actually based directly on Ollie's childhood home, which I grew up 2 doors down from. You can see there at the wrap party for the game, we actually projected a streamer playing the game against the house that the house in the game was based on. So it was a very meta, crazy moment. But through the process of unearthing these memories, I started to think about a time in my life that I didn't think about that often. In middle school, I dealt with a pretty severe chronic illness, had to have a big surgery, and was homeschooled for a year and a half. There's a picture of me in the hospital. And yeah, that was a tough time, and a lot of memories and emotions. I realized, going back, I realized, I'd repressed. I had not thought about these things in a long time. And bringing those memories back led me down the path to finally breaking this story and finally finding the mountain that, I felt I was meant to be climbing, which was figuring out the central twist that the plot hinges on, which if you play the game, you'll know, but I won't spoil. I actually found this photo on Facebook yesterday. It had been posted by Ollie, and I like this one comment. Why the fuck did you put this on the internet? But I'm actually, I guess 15-year-old me was angry that he put that on Facebook. But now 31-year-old me is very happy that he did. So I had it for this speech. But all at once, sort of in a meeting with Ollie, I figured this thing out, and I rushed home, and I wrote out a little 2-page fable version of it, and I sent it to Ollie and Will. And for the first time, there was unanimous praise. There was no fighting. They both told me they cried after reading it, and we all felt sure this was going to be the game. Only 4 years late, but we got there. And of all the positive press we received, this little article on Fanbyte is one of the ones I'm most proud of, because this writer had no way of knowing that some of this stuff came from personal experience, but she could somehow feel that, because she had gone through that same experience. So she didn't need to fact check it, she just knew. And, I've always hated that advice to write what you know, because I always felt like I'd never experienced anything worth writing about. But I also think genuinely you should write about whatever you want. But I do think what I learned is that on some level you should be, or for certain projects, I think you want to be able to write from a place of personal vulnerability, to approach subjects that make you uncomfortable, things that you maybe want to run away from. You have to be maybe a little bit willing to put your hand on the stove and hold it there. And I think if you kind of force yourself in that direction, into those vulnerable, uncomfortable places, I think that's where, a lot of the magic really starts to happen. And don't just regurgitate the structures from other media that you've consumed, because that's what I did for all those years. And again, it didn't work. And, we all know there's something coming that is probably going to be better at doing that than all of us. And one thing ChatGPT can't do is be vulnerable. So I think now more than ever, it's a good time to lean on that. So looking back, if there was one thing our team needed earlier, it was to get comfortable with that discomfort. And I would have hated to hear that 7 years ago, but I just think it takes a certain amount of life experience to get to that place. In 2014, we had set off to make this game about loss, but we didn't really know anything about loss. But in the 7 years of failure, we got to know it very well. First was the loss of the dream that we'd be the successful rock star indie studio out of the gate. But we also endured personal losses. Family members ended long-term relationships and partnerships, and even friendships, some of which were strained to the point of breaking by the very pressures of making this game. And I just wanted to take a moment, in case anyone ever finds this who worked on this game, just take a moment to share some gratitude for anyone who worked on this. There was so many people that worked on this game. There were so many errors and so many people that put so much of themselves into it. And I worry sometimes that the ones that didn't get to see it through the end feel like they can't share in its success. But they absolutely should, because the game really does belong to everyone. I mean, yeah, a game that takes that long has a lot of authors. So the story ends with us winning a BAFTA. Winning a BAFTA is a crazy process. After you get it, you're taken off stage, and you have to sign all this paperwork, which stipulates that you don't own the BAFTA, but you're actually renting the BAFTA from them, and you got to take care of it, and you can't sell it, and you can't let it get stolen or lose it. But at the after party, I lost both of the BAFTAs. So it actually ends with me losing a BAFTA. I was drunk. I was supposed to be watching them. I tried to blame Ollie for a while, but I'll admit it here, it was me. And then I came back and he said, you were supposed to be watching, and we ran back and they were gone. This was an email we had to send to BAFTA. We had to send the last photo that we had of it. So as if we didn't already seem like two dumb Americans who didn't deserve our BAFTAs. There's Ollie looking like an idiot. with the 2 BAFTAs. Yeah, but don't worry, you know, it worked out. It turned out it was just the Forza team had won so many BAFTAs, they thought they were theirs, so then they sent it back in. But, yeah. You know, but in the span of those 2 hours, I went from feeling like this artistic genius to, once again, the biggest idiot on earth. You know, and my phone had died in the process, so by the time my phone came back to life, we had lost the BAFTA. So my first call to my parents wasn't, "I won a BAFTA," it was, "I lost my BAFTA," which was a bummer. But, you know, I tell that story to just illustrate that the years of failure aren't going to be all made worthwhile by reaching some big, glorious ending. And if you think about it like that, you're definitely going to be disappointed because, you know, the universe has a way of reminding you who you are. That just a dumb guy who couldn't make it through an Intro to Unity course. And over the last year, we've started work on a new title. We're still part of the Goodbye World family, but we've actually created a brand new studio called Nice Dream, which literally just went public today. So we don't have like any followers, so if you guys want to get in on the ground floor, there it is. And we're still idiots, and we fail constantly, but I think that what this one success has given us, it's the ability to not be so afraid of failure. The team certainly still argues over what the right path is, but we just sort of assume that everyone's a little bit wrong and that we'll find out later in play testing. The last couple years I've gotten really into 2 things, Jackass and, you know, From Software games. These have been my comfort viewing. For some reason, going back to Jackass, I don't know why. But I was thinking about it, and I realized what links the 2 and why maybe I like them so much is that they're really about celebrating human failure. And our incredible ability to know that we're going to lose and that we're going to get very, very hurt, but still go out and try to do impossible things. And if you choose to make games for a living, or any highly collaborative art form, that's what it's going to be like, sort of like trying to win a staring contest with a web camera. You're inevitably going to lose over and over and over again, and then you're going to die. So there's your happy ending. Hope you guys all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for attending.